3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in a DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly?
Tamara, you light up my life. I just want to let you know.
You know, it's funny that you bring that up because that's right on theme with what we're going to talk about today.
What a coincidence.
Oh my goodness, you had that planned.
So Starlight, Star Bright, what is our show about tonight?
We are going to talk about Amazon Prime's The Boys, which is about to enter its 4th season. So this is an incredible show which deals in superhero tropes, good superheroes, bad superheroes, and a lot of in between.
Yeah, a lot of new look. I appreciate it for the new look. When we get to your part where we talk about the story. So for those of you who are catching us new, we have a 3-part, we do our show in 3 parts. One part, I discuss the science of the particular science fiction that we're discussing. Tamara discusses the storyline and, does it work in this world and all those things that people are interested in. And then at the end, we talk about the vibes and the feels and how much we love or hate the show for whatever reason. The point I'm getting at is that the story, I'm always jealous because, well, not every time, but this time, yet again, I'm jealous because, oh man, I feel like there's sort of a revolution happening in science fiction, right? I feel like everything that was old had been done so many times over and over that people are like, how can we do this again, but not do the same old thing? And this show surprises me.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really like about it. And we'll get into that more with the story, but I'm actually very excited about this particular episode because when we get into the description of Starlight's powers, we're going to talk, I think, possibly about some electricity stuff and electromagnetism maybe and things like that, which are things, honestly, like I'm a sci-fi fan who loves hard science and loves the actual science that lies beneath things. But for whatever reason, I've never really been able to wrap my head around understanding those topics very well. Like, give me the nasty stuff that you, as you like to refer to it, like bio and genetics. Give me like neuroscience. Give me spacey stuff. That's stuff that has been easier for me to like digest as a lay person who loves the science. But I'm excited to hear you break this down. So before we get into that, just so people sort of have a little bit of background about the show, we are talking about different elements of the show. It's been on for 3 seasons, so there are some spoilers. So if you don't want anything spoiled, press pause. Go watch The Boys, go watch all 3 seasons, or at least a couple, then come back and pick up our conversation here. So as we mentioned, this is a show about superheroes. It's a world where superheroes exists. The basic premise is that there's a corporation called the Vought Corporation, and they essentially kind of control and manage the superheroes, especially the 7, which basically like they kind of remind me of like almost like a Justice League. Is that like you agree, Hakeem?
Yeah. That's what I'm getting. Yeah. And I like to talk to you again. That's another storyline thing is the evil corporation, right?
Yeah.
The evil entities that, so that's an interesting thing about how people come together to form a collective, and it can be the superheroes or it could be the villains. And sometimes in these movies and these stories, the villain is a corporation, it's a government that's gone rogue. Yeah.
Right. And sometimes it's the superheroes who you think are the good guys, so to speak, who are maybe not. And that's the whole tension of the show and setup of the show, because you've got the 7 who are these, models of superhero behavior. There are many, many, many other superheroes, but these are the exalted 7 that get all the marketing and stuff. Right. And then you have a group of, they're almost like, I guess you'd call them vigilantes, and they're the anti-superheroes or the anti-supes, and these are the boys, and they are a collection of fantastic rogues who see behind the curtain of what the Vought Corporation does and really want to take the superheroes down and expose them for all the hypocrisy that's happening and all the bad crap that's going on behind the scenes. And those are our two main groups. And then what are we going to talk about today? So tell me about Starlight.
All right, so let's get into the superpowers.
Right.
So there are many characters with many different powers because, there's a cast of powered beings in this enterprise that's called the boys. Not all males.
No.
Not all dudes. Starlight superpowers, just like many superheroes, she has an array of powers. And so there's like the main power, which has to do with light. And there are her other powers. So she's super strong, right? They show her lifting the car, right?
Yeah.
She has the power of flight.
Yep.
And she has durability. She's not, there's levels to durability. There's like, you shoot me and the bullets just bounce off my chest. Versus you shoot me, ouch, that hurt. You knocked me down.
Yeah.
But you did not pierce into my body and I'm not really hurt.
Yeah, and that's where she's at with her level of durability. There are other superheroes who are stronger, who bullets do seem to bounce off of, but she's not invincible, but she does seem to have some kind of healing factor. She doesn't get as hurt as most of us would.
So Starlight's superpower, her superest of her powers, is her light electricity thing.
Right. I like to think of it, in the simplistic terms, and then I want you to extract it from there, is this idea that basically electricity goes in and blasts come out.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. She absorbs the electricity around her. So you see all of the electrical
sources,
appliances and lights and things start to be affected. Her eyes illuminate with this white light. And then she could fire these concussive blasts from her hands that are electrical in nature. They can burn through things. They can apply a force. And so the question is, does that superpower fly as far as the science goes?
That is my question. How does that science even work?
Yeah. So there are so many levels to this. There's biology, there's physics, and I'm just like, where do I start? Because this is just so juicy.
Right. Well, because another piece of it too is, and we don't need to even get into this unless you want to, but so you mentioned her eyes glowing, right? So there's the piece of it where electricity comes in, stuff comes out. That's one piece. But there's also, she seems to have bioluminescence, which is slightly different, where when she gets into a heightened emotional state, her eyes and her hands will glow. It's hard to tell if that's related or almost like a separate biological system, but that's another important piece of her powers.
That's right. So just like in the animal kingdom, right? There's bioreceptivity, where you can detect electric fields and currents around you. There's electrosensitivity. There's electrogenesis, where you can actually generate your own voltages and fields. And then, which one did you just say? Oh, bioluminescence. That's another one. But so let's back up from the biology a bit and let's go to the physics. So you mentioned electric and magnetic fields, because electricity is reliant upon electric fields. So if you look at electric fields and magnetic fields, where do they intersect with science fiction?
And wait, I'm even going to have you go back further. Give me the basic.
Go further.
Go dial it back. Give me the basic definition of what is an electric field, what is a magnetic field, and how do those two things interrelate to each other?
In order to understand electric fields, there's a related thing known as electric charge, okay? And so the fundamental units of electric charge are found in matter. And so the electron has a negative electric charge, right? And we use that sort of as the standard of one unit of electric charge is the electron's electric charge. And the proton in the nucleus of atoms has this positive electric charge that's equal in magnitude to that of the electron, which to me is a crazy coincidence. Because the electron is just this one single thing, but a proton is a composite system of quarks and gluons, massless, chargeless gluons, not with electric charge, right? But the thing about that is that imagine, sound can cancel, like sound canceling headphones. It picks up the noise and it plays the anti-sound, right? When two waves collide, they add. So if I add the exact, so if a signal comes in with, say, 5 units of positive sound, if I hit it with 5 units of negative sound, they sum to 0.
Why is it Why is it that teenagers seem to have figured out an anti-sound for parents? Because they don't seem to hear anything I say.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Sorry, I
let me
didn't mean
tell
to
you,
get you off
Tamara,
track.
no, 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 no. You want to add insult to injury? At least you're not an educator. When you're an educator, other parents turn to you like, can you tell me how to get my child to, like, please, you tell me. Like,
Right.
nobody's kids, right? It's like, I want to listen to everybody but you. Okay, so it's been long known since ancient times there were these so-called lodestones, right? Magnets. And you could, feel that there was a force between them. So in the same magnetic polarity, it comes in two types. Either magnetic fields are going in or they're coming out, right? And electric fields and magnetic fields are force fields. But the fields themselves are created by the charges. So the existence of an electric charges create electric fields. Moving electric charges create magnetic
Oh
fields.
my God, thank you. I've been waiting to understand not the different, but yes, thank you. That's what I've been looking
Yeah,
for.
exactly. That's it. And now both electric charges and both electric fields
Mhm.
and magnetic fields are force
Mhm.
fields.
Okay.
Okay? So to field an electric field, for it to apply a force to you, you must yourself possess an electric charge. So I could take a neutral atom that has the same number of electrons and protons, put it in an electric field, it might turn to, if it's a polar atom or molecule, but otherwise, it doesn't care. But now if I make it not electrically neutral, say I remove an electron, one or more electrons, now it's going to move. That electric field is going to put a force on it that is going to cause it to move in a straight line. And so the direction that it moves, it'll move in one direction or another because electric charges come in positive and negative. So we define the direction of positive electric field to be the direction that a proton would move if it was placed in that field.
Okay, that makes sense.
All
Yeah.
right. Now, here's what's really cool. If you look at all motion that occurs in nature, all of it can be described by a combination of two types of motion:
Mhm.
straight line motion and curve rotational motion. All right. So electric fields move charges in straight lines, and magnetic fields move them in curves. It changes their direction. If you take a stationary charge,
Mhm.
it does not feel a magnetic field.
And by
It's
stationary, you
only
mean a
when it's
neutral
moving.
charge where protons, electrons are equal. It has no charge, yeah?
No, no, no. Once it has a
Okay.
charge, I have some positive or negative
Mhm.
charge. If it's stationary, it does not feel a force from the magnetic field.
Okay.
But if it is moving, it does feel a force from the magnetic field. But it's not a force that will move it in a straight line like an electric field would.
Mhm.
It's a force that makes it change direction. So charged particles are forced to orbit
Mhm.
magnetic fields,
Yeah.
right? So those are electric fields and magnetic fields. And the key thing here is this character, Anna, right? Isn't that her
Annie
name?
January. Yeah. Isn't that a great
Annie
name?
January,
Annie
yes.
January?
She can blast out these concussive blasts,
Mhm.
right? But they're acting on neutral matter, right? We're all electrically neutral for the most part,
Mhm.
right? Unless you rub your feet on the carpet or put a comb through your hair, you get a few electrons off or on. But she hits you with this neutral items with this concussive blast.
Mhm.
So how do you turn electric fields into a concussive blast?
That is a great question. Do you know the answer?
So here's the thing about the interaction between light and matter.
Mhm.
Okay. When light interacts with matter, light can't, like, for example, if I have a wall, the light does not pass through it. So that means that the light is actually interacting with those atoms and those molecules in that wall, and that light is being absorbed. It's not making it out the other side. But if I have a window, it's also made of matter, but it's transparent, right? So why is it transparent? It's because the matter, which is primarily the electrons, are, I'm going to use a word that's not really appropriate, but it makes
It's
sense in
the
a
boys.
way
There's
that,
so much in the boys that is not really
yeah,
appropriate.
I'm gonna personify matter,
Okay.
right? I'm gonna personify electrons. They choose not to interact, so the light just goes straight through it,
Yeah.
right? But it has to do with this particular electrical state. So the point I'm getting at is, although the window does that for visible light,
Mhm.
ultraviolet light gets absorbed in the window
Mhm.
because the energy of the ultraviolet light is such that the electrons like, you know what? I will interact with you.
Okay.
You know, I'm going to ignore that visible light, but
Right.
you, electromagnetic light, ultraviolet light, I'm just going to keep you in here with me and you ain't getting out the other side, right?
Yeah.
So you could tune the energy levels of the light that you're shooting out
Mhm.
in order for it to have the effect on matter that you want it to have.
Interesting. Okay. So
Yeah,
so are you saying that the way that Starlight's powers could ostensibly work, because they never really explain it in the show other
right.
than knowing that the source of her powers is compound V, which is this compound that Vought Industries makes, which, spoiler, she thinks that her powers have been given to her by God. That's what her mom has always said. Later, we find out she's been
Yeah,
injected with this compound that creates superheroes. But it's unpredictable as to how this compound will manifest itself
right,
in each superhero. So you're saying for
right.
her, possibly, if I'm understanding, that the way that it is manifested is she is able to fine tune the way that the light is coming out and interacting?
For the particular effects
Yeah.
of her blasts on humans, on things,
Mhm.
you would need to have something like that in order for that to interact in that way, right? If you want the energy absorbed in that particular being, there are details in it, right? It's sort of, for example, the silicon chips that are used as detectors quite often, right? It turns out those same ones that are used for visible light are transparent to infrared light. And so you can build new materials to tune them, to tune a new material to absorb the infrared. And you can do that, right? We put together different materials to have the energy levels within the material such that the light that we're interested in is the light that's absorbed in this material and generates an electric signal as a
Well,
result.
it's funny too, because I mean, we're not talking about Homelander-specific powers today,
Yeah,
but, one of his
right.
powers is that he can see through walls unless it's I
Yeah.
think, is it zinc that he can't see through? Think it's
Beats
I
me.
think I
Yeah.
think it's zinc. I might be
Yeah.
wrong there,
Yeah.
so, fans, if you
Right.
are listening and you need to correct me, please do, because I would like to
And,
know.
and and by the way, fans in New Orleans, by zinc, she does not mean the basin where you wash your dishes in the sink.
I
She
do not mean
means
where you wash your hands in the
the
zinc.
element. Not the zinc, not that zinc.
No, different zinc, different zinc.
Here's the other thing, though, right? We talked about the fact that biogenesis
Mhm.
exists. So every cell in your body has the ability to create an electric charge and become a tiny little battery
Yeah.
itself. Okay. So they do this thing called ion pumping. So if they kick ions out of themselves, sodium, chlorine ions, the ions themselves have a positive electric charge. And so that leaves the cell interior with a negative electric charge. All right. And so when they want to, for example, an electric eel, when they want to generate their electric current, they take those ions back into themselves, but then they do what a storm cloud does. So what a storm cloud does to generate a lightning bolt is it separates the negative and positive charge in the cloud. It's called charge separation. And so charges want to flow to equalize that charge, right? And so it can make a connection with the ground, right? and equalize the charge. And that's what an electric eel does. So the thing is that each cell makes a tiny itty bitty little charge, a little tiny voltage like 0.083 or something like that, right? Volts. But the thing is, just like with batteries, when you put them in a flashlight, you put them back to back in series. That's what an electric eel does. It has a stack of these electrocyte cells that have this charge separation. So now they all add up. So an electric eel can generate like 400 volts. So the electric catfish is something like 200
Do you
volts.
know
And they're still delicious.
do you your dietary habits continue to amaze me. So wait, so do you know, like for an electric eel, for example, as they say, is the sum of the charges greater than its parts when they interact like that? Or is
No, it's
it
not greater than the parts. It is the sum
it is
of the
the sum?
parts, but then
Okay.
you lose a little bit because, there is no perfect conductor.
Right.
I
You
mean, we
always
do
lose a
have
little
these
in
things
heat.
called superconductors, which are perfect conductors, but not at that temperature.
Right.
So not at room temperature,
Right.
right? And they don't exist biologically as far as we know. So the whole point I'm getting at is that electrogenesis in biological species here on Earth is fish and amphibians, mostly fish, right? There's something like 8,600 species that can detect fields, and like, you know, 1/10 of that can create their own electric fields, but most of them are weak, right? And then there are the strong um, bioelectric species like electric eels, electric catfish. So now we're talking about Starlight, right? So she's an ultra super person. But the point is that you could imagine that biologically, what this substance has done to her is created a type of battery cell in her body. And so that whole process of absorbing electrical energy from everything around you, that's something that also sounds pretty weird. And how could you possibly do that? Until
Yeah.
you get into the physics of the matter.
Okay. Give me the final caveat here then. Why does it work?
And here's the final caveat. And it has to do with the basic essence of our existence. And so it's something that the thing about Albert Einstein, I love the guy, but I hate him at the same time. Because every time it seems like I've discovered a deep truth all on my own, Einstein did it 100 and some years ago. I'm like, oh man,
Yeah, I mean,
Einstein, I just thought of something so deep.
oh no.
Well, here's what Einstein realized. So once, at the end of the 20th century, the 19th century, that's when they did all the electricity and magnetism stuff, right? So this idea of a field was invented in the mid 19th century. So now, by the time you get to the transition from the 19th to the 20th century, people are looking at how light is created by matter. And one of the main ways that matter creates light is when you heat the matter, it begins to glow, right? And so you already have the Faraday and Gauss and Maxwell and all these people that invented electricity and magnetism. And now this idea of fields looks like it's something that's truly real. When we started looking at the basic fundamental nature of matter, it turned out that we discovered that there is a mirror realm of fields and a mirror realm of particles. So we exist and we interact, we're made up of real particles, real electrons and protons. Our electric fields are real electric fields. But then we discover that there are so-called virtual particles and virtual particles that make up these virtual fields.
Okay, my
And
real mind is about to be blown.
Exactly. So take another big coincidence about electrons.
Yeah.
Every electron is identical to every other electron. When you're working out the basic physics of how things work, it's called certain types of statistics, Bose statistics, Fermi statistics. You have to take into account the fact that everyone is identical and you can't tell one from another. That is a part of the math that makes it come out right to describe the world. So when that is the case, that is a hint of something deeper that underlies it. And what that tells you is that the electron itself is not really the thing that is. It is an emergent thing from a more fundamental thing that is. Let me give you an example. Suppose you play the harp.
Yeah.
And you play a note on your harp, boom, or piano, boom. Let's call that note a C.
Okay.
From C note to C note,
it's the same.
It's the same, right? But that's not what's real. What's real is the vibrating air. Or what's real is the instrument that started the air to vibrating, right? And in the same way, what we call particles, so if you think of vibrating air as an excitation of the air molecules, what we call particles are excitations of these fundamental underlying fields that we never are aware of that are called quantum fields.
This is where we get into the quantum realm.
This is where we get into the quantum realm, right? So all around us are these fields. And I was like, do I really believe this? Do I really believe this? Because every field that we knew that existed was tied to matter somehow, right? The electric field, the gravitational field, the magnetic field. But then there was this one field, they're like, yeah, just like those quantum fields, it just exists everywhere in space, but it has no source. And I'm like, right? Well, we discovered it. It's called the Higgs field, right? The Higgs boson. And so now I'm like, whoa. So now these quantum fields, where I was thinking maybe it's just a mathematical trick, it turns out they're really real. So here's the thing about those fields.
Yeah, how does this
You
all
can
tie
have
back to
real
Starlight?
particles. Yeah, we're getting to Starlight because you can have real particles and you can also have virtual particles. You can have real photons, which is what light is made of, or you can have virtual photons. And not only that, there are experiments where you send in a particle of light of sufficient energy. If it passes by a particle of matter, it can turn into two new particles that did not exist. So you know that thing they told you in school, matter can neither be created nor
Yeah.
destroyed? Not true. So here's the other point about it, right? So one model is that what these virtual particles are. So basically you have these fields, just like if I had water that was perfectly still. If you looked at it microscopically, you see that the surface is like roiling, right? With there's some energy in there. Zero ain't zero, right? Was the same way with these quantum fields. So that roiling is these virtual particles. So you can borrow energy from the vacuum. Even though it's zero on average, these ups and downs, you can borrow energy from the vacuum. So now let's get to Starlight's powers. Basically, the first thing you need is the energy. So if there are electrical devices around you, they are manipulating the quantum electromagnetic fields. Okay. And so now you can absorb that energy into yourself if you have some way of manipulating that field yourself to find those energy concentrations and draw it toward yourself because it is mobile, right? We do have electric currents and flowing light. Then the next thing is that how do you store it in your body? Well, biology does provide us with a model with these cells like the electric eel has. Now, how do you project it? If you can manipulate the quantum electromagnetic field for the purpose of absorbing energy, you could also potentially manipulate that same field for projecting that energy and even tuning it to the wavelength that you want, provided you have sufficient energy absorbed to do that.
So you can tune it to what Starlight sends out, which is sometimes light, which is sometimes heat, and which is sometimes force. So
That's right.
feel like
Light does all that.
I feel like
Yeah.
I'm hearing you say your definitive answer on whether the science of Starlight's powers, Starlight's light powers, what's your definitive answer there, and does it fly?
I'm going to go out on a limb here. Every physicist is probably going to disagree with me, but I'm going to say it flies.
Woohoo! All right. I love it. I love the
Yeah.
case that you have
I
built.
love it. Your Honor, I rest my case.
Well, I guess that brings us to the story question, right? The story.
Yes,
So
the
we switch
story
now
question.
to the what if they've built this world. You've broken down
Yes.
the how it could potentially happen, but once they've created this world and taken us on the what if this world really existed, does it all track? And does this power kind of help us build a bigger story world? Okay, so starting with the building blocks of it, right? So we were talking about the fact that she has bioluminescence. So that's the ability that, like, when separate and apart from being able to send out blasts of light, when she gets emotional, and all kinds of emotions, sometimes it's when she's angry, sometimes it's when she's threatening somebody, and sometimes it's when she's turned on. Her eyes will light up, her hands will glow. And when you think about how are you getting to know a character, how are you getting to know kind of where they are feeling themselves, where they're, making their way in the world, especially in this story world where a big theme is external appearances versus what's really going on inside, right? Like you've got this larger theme of superheroes that appear to be so good, saving the world, this corporation that cares about everything and everyone and really does not. They care about their profit and their bottom line. And then you've got these individual superheroes who all have their own motives and who have all, I'm talking specifically now about the seven, they've all crossed lines in major ways. They all have different reasons for doing it. So when you're looking at, like, how do you every actor approaches sort of inner life and external life differently, but the fact that they're using one of her powers to help us as the audience understand kind of what's going on inside her head, I think is a really nice synthesis of something cool, something that looks cool, a great effect, but also helps us go on the journey with her, right? So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
one way.
So
Yeah.
that whole thing of when she's turned on, right? I
Mhm.
mean, that was sort of a nice surprise. in the scene and added an element like, ooh.
Yeah, hey, she's a little extra, nothing wrong with that, that's all good.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's one thing that really struck me. Another thing that struck me, a lot of what we were talking about before with the science of it was the way her powers are structured is that she pulls in power from external sources, right? Like city lights, flickering lights, whatever, any sort of electrical thing that's going on around her. And what that means is that while that is a strength, it is also a vulnerability because if those power, like bioluminescence aside, like if the ability to send out beams of light in whatever form can only come if she's got something to draw from, if there's no source, she doesn't have that power. I mean, she still has super strength. She still has, what seem to be some kind of healing powers, but she does not have her main power. And that means she's got some vulnerability. It means she's not a perfect, indestructible superhero. And it allows room for conflict. We see in season 2 where she's actually imprisoned, and they specifically make sure that she does not have access to any kind of electrical source. So that is way more interesting when it comes to character and plot than somebody who can always, summon up the power they need
That's
at
right.
will.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
I really appreciated that.
Every Superman needs their kryptonite.
Yeah, they do, because otherwise, what are we doing? And it's a real
Yeah.
credit to Eric Kripke, who I don't know
Mhm.
technically, according to WGA rules, what he is credited as show creator slash developer, because there are specific rules about
What's
that.
WGA?
So WGA is the Writers Guild of America. So some of
Oh, yes, that
that
WGA.
WGA. So some of you may be familiar. The WGA was in the news a lot last summer in
Yeah.
2023 because of the strikes. But the WGA actually is what ultimately determines the official credits on a show. So little behind the
I
scenes,
see.
basically. When you create a show, that created by credit is a very specific
Mhm.
credit. And there are rules. Like you can't just say, oh, I created this
Mhm.
thing. There are very specific
Yeah,
rules
yeah.
as to how it's attained. And one of the pieces.
So what happens, like, in this case, when there's a book beforehand?
Right.
Is the show a
So
yeah.
that's why I was saying I'm not exactly sure what his specific credit is, because if something is based on an underlying piece of material, then usually you are not allowed to have a created by credit. Because the other thing is a created by credit also is very specific as far as like what revenue is generated and what your participation in that revenue is. Now, sometimes as a writer, you can negotiate a created by credit as part of your deal, depending on what your relationship with the creator is, what your relationship with the material, the studio, like all of those kinds of things, and how much clout you have. Um,
I wish you had told me this when I was negotiating my movie deal.
Full disclosure, I am not a lawyer. This is not considered legal advice. We are merely having a conversation. Please do not take anything that we say as legal advice. You are not a client. Um,
It is all anecdotal.
so that's kind of like the basic overview, right? So like this, The Boys, for those who may not be familiar, the source material is a comic book by Garth Ennis, a series, and it's amazing. And there's a lot of stuff that's pulled, but there's also a lot of stuff that's different. And in fact, Starlight is a character who in the comics she's very much a supporting character. She's not a main character. But Eric Kripke has talked about the idea that when he and the writers were developing this, one of the things they thought a lot about was the fact that they really needed some characters that you could root for. And in this case,
Mm,
it's Starlight and Annie
mhm,
January.
mhm.
And on the side of the
Yeah.
boys, you've got Huey, who's played by Jack Quaid, who is such a fantastic character, like watching him go on his journey of empowerment. And, for folks who are like, wait, why does that name sound familiar? He
Mm.
is the voice of Boimler on Star Trek Lower Decks, the animated show.
We don't want to protect you from the Klingons and the Borg. We just want to explore and study f***ing quasars.
Right. So you've got in this incredibly dark world where you have a lot of people crossing lines. Even, I mean, honestly, even in the boys, like some of the motives are what
Yeah.
I would call maybe virtuous, or they're defending someone they loved or avenging a death, things that we can totally understand on an emotional level.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to cross lines in pursuit. I mean,
Right.
Butcher
Yeah.
is amazing, played by Carl Urban, and he is a force, and that line does not exist for him. But
Right.
with
Yeah.
Annie and with Huey, with Starlight and with Huey, you have
Right.
these two characters who are sort of thrust into these worlds, and they are
Mhm.
trying to negotiate that, right? They're trying to traverse, how far am I willing to go? Do the ends justify the means? Where do I stick to my morality? Where do I let it go? And in their journey together, because they're friends and more at times, in their journey together, they're not always in the same place about that, which is really fun character-wise to see that friction happen. Um, but coming back to Starlight's powers, there's a very direct metaphor there. She is the light. She brings
She
the
is, yeah.
light to this show. And that's what I was saying before, was that Eric Kripke has talked about in the creation of the show. He knew you were going to need to have characters to root for, right? Like that us as the audience could have a way in. And that's why they decided to elevate Starlight to really be a main protagonist in the show, so that we as the viewers would have that.
Yeah. It's kind of like when Eminem had to put that one "My Name Is" on the album, otherwise it was just too dark.
I had not thought of that metaphor, but yes. Yeah.
Saw that story somewhere. But that's one of the things about the writing of this show that I was unfamiliar with the books before I watched the show. I was just surprised by it completely, which I love. But I just love the darkness of the heroes. It was so unexpected at that point for me, because we're getting, there's traditional. I feel like as you look at how, Batman used to be edgy because he would beat you up, right? Like the average crime fighter. Yeah, right.
Dark Knight
like,
was about as dark as it got.
The point I'm getting at is, I think that with these superheroes, right, it's sort of how, it's oh my God. I wish I could remember these women's name who made, I know one of them, but the song WAP, right? It's like, we started with Captain America, and now we've landed on the boys. We started with cars that go boom, now we've landed on WAP.
Well, wait, I have to bring something into this since we're talking about music, right? So, I always like finding like some fun behind the scenes stuff or some interesting quotes. So here's a random music superhero tie-in. So the composer for The Boys his name is Christopher Lennertz, and I actually met him last summer because they did a Rogers the Musical show at Disneyland for Disney 100, which was the 100th celebration of Disney. And for folks who may not be familiar, in the Hawkeye series on Disney Plus, it opens with Hawkeye in New York City, and he's there for the opening of Rogers the Musical, which is a tribute to the fallen Steve Rogers. And on this, and so on this episode, they actually have a fully done, or I don't know if it's fully done on the episode, or you see a piece of it on the episode, and then they did it externally. And so anyway, you see a piece of this musical, which the full song exists for. And then it got so much acclaim, like so many fans were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Are you really going to do a Rogers the Musical? So the brilliant minds at Disney got together and said, yeah, let's do this. And I've got to give a big shout out to Dan Fields, who is a director that I worked with back in the day in theater and is at Disney Imagineering. I'm not going to say his title because they keep changing these things, but he's amazing and brilliant. And if you go to Disney theme parks and see Marvel things, he's one of the key people involved. So anyway, Dan was involved in bringing this to life, and they had a full 35-minute full-on musical of Rogers the Musical, and it played last summer. So I was brought in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was brought in for a press event to help kick it off and do a behind-the-scenes panel. That's how I got to know Chris Lennertz. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, we're actually doing this episode on The Boys looking at Starlight. Is there anything that you could share that might be fun when you're thinking about how you put the music together? Some shows have themes for particular characters, other shows use particular instrumentation. So I'm going to actually read what he sent me because I don't want to get it wrong.
This is so good.
So here's your behind the scenes tidbit. So this is what he wrote. So in the last episode of season 3, which is a big one for Starlight, because that's when we see her levitate, right? There's a great example of what I do musically as Starlight uses her powers, not just the flying, but energy. So when she harnesses this from other sources, thus expanding beyond human means and focuses it, I always have a rising chord progression as the energy builds, along with a pulse for momentum. And in this case, it's a repetitive string figure. Then, and only at her strongest, do I add choral elements which don't really appear anywhere else in the show. I feel like the group ensemble aspect of a choir is similar to her harnessing the energy of many while draining at the same time. And that's the final piece of the puzzle as to how to give her the strength to rise off the ground and then eventually focus that energy to trap Soldier Boy, who is a bomb at that point, so that Maeve can push him out the window and save everyone.
One thing about the human animal is the relationship with music has always fascinated me. Even babies, right? I've always been one to
Yeah.
beat, make little beats
Mhm.
all the time. And I see my little nieces or my own kids, just jamming to the
Yeah.
beat and they can't even walk yet. And so there's something really fundamental there. But also, I remember, I was a musician myself when I was young. And we went through like, oh, yeah, this chord makes you feel this way. This chord makes you feel
Yeah.
this way. And it was just like, wow, his progression of how he thinks of bringing the climax of her power musically is,
Well,
oh,
and yeah, and I mean, overall, I think that's like one example from a member of the creative team, but you see that care in, I think, every aspect of the show, from the
yeah.
writing to the direction to the costumes to
I
so
was just gonna say
yeah,
the costumes.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody had fun.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Somebody who knows the
Yeah,
superhero world and was, like, anxious to skewer it in the best way. So, I have to
yeah,
say, like, because of all of
yeah,
these things, because the way all these things come together, and because the way that her powers are used to
yeah.
really, dare I say it, illuminate her character. Sorry, I had
Yes,
to go
yes.
there. When it comes to Starlight's powers and the way the story world is built, I absolutely think it flies.
It flies, baby.
It flies.
Yeah, what a story, what a
Mhm.
storyline, what a universe they've created for us. I just love it. I just love it. Talk about explosions in movie. This The boys have some explosions.
Alright, so let's talk about, like, our sort of third piece of this all. Does it fly for the feels?
Right.
Does it fly for the vibes? Is there sort of an
Yeah.
overarching thing? Like, would it be good to have superheroes in the world? What's your take?
Oh man, so there's so much because I'm still the boy who discovered superheroes
Mhm.
as a kid, and I just love all things superhero. But the idea of certain these folks actually living in my world, and the thing about these particular people is that they are very human. You're going to see, the way it was created in the 20th century. They were a bit beyond reproach unless you were their characters, right? Unless you were a super villain, in which case you were just all bad. But people having all these powers, you just look at it, power corrupts. It really goes one way or the other, right? It really does. It kind of depends on, I don't know, your formative years or something, how you end up dealing with certain
Well,
things, right?
yeah, I
You can
mean,
be a
Homelander is a pretty
caretaker,
big
or you can be a
example that if you're, grown in a lab, then maybe you're not gonna manifest so well when it comes to being a superhero.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And so I love the show.
Mhm.
And I think that, we need to have a guest on here who is like a sci-fi hater. I hate science, I hate sci-fi. Like you and I both love sci-fi and
Right.
science. So, a good story like this, we're like,
Mhm.
oh, I love it. We're just so transparent. There might be a
Yeah,
case for the science not getting it. But the writers are, we're kind of advanced at this stuff now. The easy stuff has been done. So they tend to be more tight
yeah.
with this story than some old things may have been inconsistent, right? When you get a new set of eyes, a set of hostile eyes on your proposal, they see things you never saw and they'll tear it apart, right? So, I don't know if we're the best people to ask because this is a show that's popular for a reason. It's popular with folks just like us. It's well done. It's well done. And I wonder too, if I was a kid, I would really be trying to watch this, but it doesn't really seem like the show for kids.
No, because I think part of the reason that this show flies is
Yeah,
because they are digging into some deeper material. I mean, they're digging into
yeah,
misogyny, they're digging into class,
Yeah.
they're digging into corporate
Yeah.
greed, they're digging into
Yeah.
political
Yeah.
power. I mean, we didn't even get into like we don't have time to get into this. The
Oh
whole
yeah.
like religion piece of it, and
Right. Yeah.
extremism. But
Yeah. Because Annie's a Christian,
yeah,
right?
yeah, she's a Christian
Yeah.
and she's been raised in a very religious household. She was told her powers were
Yeah.
given to her by God. There's a whole through
Yeah.
line, with that. So the fact that they weave these deeper, more complex topics in and then use the superhero genre to explore them in a really gritty, sometimes nasty way, I think is what makes it more than just a gore fest or more than just like oh, look at cool effects kind of a thing. Like there's stuff that
Right.
stays with you.
Yeah. Oh,
There's some
absolutely.
nasty stuff
Yeah.
happening in
Yeah.
here, and they're
Yeah. Yeah.
commenting on it and letting you letting you have all kinds of reactions. So that to me is why overall the show flies and that it is popular and that people are coming back to it and that honestly it's spawning a whole
100%.
universe. I mean, there's an animated spinoff. There's Gen V, which is a spinoff that just ended its first. I'm not sure when our podcast is airing, but it just ended
Yeah.
its first season, which is about like a college. So there's a whole universe, and I think there's a reason why because they've created a really deep, rich story world. Which, if
Right.
you're willing to
Yeah.
go there,
Yeah.
um, you know,
No, I'm the same. Even though I love sci-fi, science, superpowers, and all that, that to me is really secondary. The personalities, it's so rare that I say that about sci-fi, but it's really the personalities that make the show for me and the interactions between the humans. Which who have I become here? What am I saying? I don't
you're turning into a soft
I don't know
Maggie.
myself anymore.
Well, look, I mean, the other thing again, like, is we're talking about Starlight, who, as we mentioned, is sort of our way in a lot of ways, and Huey as well. Who,
Right.
there are these characters who do try to have some hope, who do try to light the way
Yeah.
forward, who do try to not completely succumb to the dark. And I think you need that mix because if it was all dark, if it was
Right.
all hopes, and I'm gonna actually admit something here, which is that I tried to watch the show when it first came out, right? Because you read the description on paper and
Yeah.
you're like, yeah, like this is a perfect show for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I watched just, I think maybe even just 2 episodes. And I wasn't into it because it wasn't that long after COVID. And honestly, the
Yeah.
world was
Yeah.
in a pretty dark place. And
Oh, I see. You'd had enough.
I just I didn't need that
Yeah.
energy. But now that there's been, like, it was too
Right.
much for me, honestly. But now that
Well, let me tell you,
there's been some.
for me, it was like watching a car wreck,
Mhm.
like that sort of like, I can't take my eyes off of it. I watched it when it came
Mhm.
out and I was just like, what? What?
Well, I'm really glad to have had a chance to revisit it because now, like,
Give me my
I'm
popcorn.
now I'm ready for it. Now I'm like, give
Yeah.
me my popcorn
Yeah.
and let me keep going. So your definitive answer to does it fly for the vibes is?
We really need to get a hater on here because I don't know. Again, I don't trust myself. I like this stuff, but it flies. It flies for me for the feels.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I feel the same way.
And for you?
Yeah, I feel the same way for all the reasons
Yeah.
that I mentioned. So
I want to like to see who gave it a bad review and why.
Hmm.
What did they find in it?
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. If this does not fly for you, let us know in the
Yeah.
comments. And thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of Does It Fly? Make sure to check us out on our socials. Does It Fly Pod on various social platforms.
Every Friday, we have a new episode for you, so check us out.
Friday = Does It Fly Day.